Hello, I'm Li Jianhua. Welcome to Global Business Europe. Our top stories. Oil prices hover around $100 a barrel as Houthi attacks in the Red Sea threaten to create a second choke point on global supplies. EasyJet profits take a nosedive as soaring fuel costs and Middle East tensions hit travel demand. Is big tech's big spending paying off? Tesla and Alphabet shares tumble as earnings fail to impress investors. And more fines for Google from the EU for favoring their own products and limiting consumer choices. Oil prices are once again hovering around $100 a barrel mark. The spike comes after Yemen's Iran-aligned Houthis struck 2 oil tankers in the Red Sea as part of a naval blockade on Saudi Arabia. It threatens to create a second choke point on global oil supplies alongside the near closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Our correspondent Kate Fisher is in Washington. Kate, this conflict is now threatening yet another busy shipping route. So just how worried are markets about the impacts on oil supplies and prices?
Well, yeah, they are worried. Analysts suggesting this could be really destabilizing. Some analysts suggesting that if it doesn't get, if the aggression isn't dialed down, we could see oil prices for Brent going past $120 a barrel. The reason being that this was kind of the Saudis' workaround for when the Strait of Hormuz was impassable to ships. They massively increased the number of barrels of oil and related fuel that they were sending south out of the Red Sea to bypass the Strait of Hormuz. And if that is no longer an option, then it really puts a choke point on so much of this Middle Eastern oil. It's particularly affecting Asian markets. Saudi Arabian oil that was going that route was mainly destined for Southeast Asia. So once again, this is, a country or a rebel group using a geographical choke point as a geopolitical tool, and it is not just affecting geopolitics but the economy as well. And certainly they realise, as they realise the power this has, they don't have to strike that many ships for it to kind of spook shipping companies and force them to look at alternative ways of getting their fuel around the world. And certainly, even though we've only had a small number of ships affected so far, it's had an outsized effect on what shipping companies are willing to do and what they're willing to risk.
Well, thanks, Kate, for that update. That is Kate Fisher, our correspondent in Washington. So it's not just energy prices and global shipping. The war in Iran is also having a huge impact on the travel sector. Here is our correspondent, Catherine Zhu. Catherine.
Thanks, Jianhua. Well, we're seeing all that play out in a series of financial results today. British budget airline EasyJet reported third-quarter profits of just under $114 million. Now, that's down 70% on 2025. It took a $140 million hit from rocketing fuel costs. However, it says business has begun to improve, with passengers continuing a trend of booking close to departure. Now, meanwhile, the world's largest airline reported second-quarter earnings of $16.7 billion today. That's a 16% increase on last year. However, American airline bosses are projecting a loss for the third quarter and a flattened-out full-year outlook. Earlier this year, it estimated fuel costs for 2026 could add $4 billion compared to last year. Now, in the UK, record passenger traffic helped Heathrow Airport's half-year profits more than double compared to 2025. Pre-tax profits came in just under $600 million. However, underlying core profits, which focus on primary business, declined. Now, this is mainly due to domestic tax hikes and declining passenger numbers in the Middle East, which dropped 25%. Now, when hostilities began at the end of February, the cost of jet fuel skyrocketed. Pre-war, it was between $85 to $90 a barrel. By mid-April, it had shot up to over $200. The MOU signed in June helped ease prices, but the renewed conflict in the past 12 days has pushed them up again to around $150 per barrel. Now, IATA, the International Air Transport Association, is projecting a full-year average cost of $152 a barrel. That's 70% year-on-year increase. Well, let's bring in Anita Mendarata. She's a special advisor to the Secretary General of UN Tourism. She also advises the aviation industry and is the author of the book, The Call to Leadership. Anita, thanks so much for joining us today. So should airline passengers, should they brace for higher fuel prices and therefore higher ticket prices?
Catherine, thank you very much for having me back. It's incredible we're having this conversation 5 months into the conflict when initially it was anticipated it was only going to last 5 weeks. And to answer your question, I think what's important is that, quite honestly, travelers have become quite accustomed to and familiar with the fact that this is going to be an exceptionally challenging year for travel. We know that fuel surcharges are being added on. We know that any of the hedging that was allowed with European airlines is now wearing down into the end of the year. And travelers expect that, and they're working that in because we're seeing that despite the conflict, despite concerns, despite the cost, travel is surging this summer. So interestingly, the summer travel season, with its high degree of travel activity, is giving us a bit of a false sense of confidence around this year as a whole. People are getting out there now knowing that by the end of the year, things could be much more uncomfortable when it comes to especially ticket costs for the end of the close of 2026.
Indeed, and Anita, we are seeing more restrictions, aren't we? Just today, Europe advising its airlines to avoid Jordanian airspace.
Yes.
Do you think people are afraid to travel, and should they be?
It's a great point that you mentioned, because whether it's a conflict, whether it's an epidemic taking place, the contagion of fear is one of the real barriers. So exactly what you said with Jordan, for instance. And if you look at it, Catherine, 1 in 7 Jordanians rely on the tourism economy for their livelihoods. It's responsible for 15% of the nation's GDP. And it has some of the most remarkable historic, religious and natural sites, including UNESCO. But they're caught in a very difficult neighborhood. So people naturally are worried about flying into Jordan and getting caught there with disruptions because it is such a challenging region at the moment. So even if they go on holiday, will they get stuck? Will flights be grounded? Will borders be closed? So again, travelers are having to work out where they want to go, and are there considerations about the peace of mind with which they will travel, not only the route and the airlines that they're going to take. So Jordan is an interesting indication of how even if a country is not directly involved in a crisis, the contagion of fear locks them into that psychological space with travelers.
And Anita, obviously there are other factors at play. In Europe, of course, we've seen heat waves, we've seen wildfires. Do you think people are rethinking a summer vacation in the age of extreme weather?
Sadly, Europe has been hit at many levels, as you're saying, with extreme heat and with the issues with EES, the entry and exit system. So many people are thinking they're going to explore where they want to go. But to your point about heat, interestingly, we're seeing, as we've been saying, cooler destinations further north, further out in terms of the intensity of travel growing. But what we don't want is people leaving those traditional tourism destinations, because they, again, rely on tourism for their economies. So it's about stretching the traditional tourism season, going a little bit earlier, going a little bit later in the calendar year, trying to develop year-round tourism rather than putting all of the intensity in summertime, which is heating up not only in activity, but now, as we know, in extreme heat, and putting huge pressure on all of these countries that Mother Nature, quite honestly, is simply fighting with at the moment.
Anita Mendarata, thank you so much for your time. Obviously, issues that we will be continuing to cover it on Global Business.
Oh, thank you very much, Catherine. Thank you. Well, the European Central Bank has held interest rates at 2.25%, but is keeping the door open for an increase in September. The jump in energy prices triggered by fresh tensions in the Middle East is threatening to keep inflation well above the bank's 2% target.
Forward-looking indicators suggest that economic growth will remain modest in the near term, weighed down by the energy shock and related uncertainties. Yet the fundamental drivers of medium-term growth remain intact. Private consumption, investment in new digital technologies, government spending on defense and infrastructure, and some recovery in exports should all contribute to overall growth momentum.
Well, European regulators have given the green light for Paramount Skydance to take over Warner Brothers Discovery. The $110 billion deal comes after Paramount agreed to end a major film distribution partnership with Universal Pictures in Europe. The mega merger still faces a legal obstacle in the US. But President Donald Trump says Saudi Arabia must join the Abraham Accords and normalize ties with Israel before their landmark nuclear deal takes effect. It's a significant condition not previously mentioned when it was announced on Wednesday. If finalized, the agreement will allow Saudi Arabia to develop a civilian nuclear program. The UK's new Prime Minister says pubs, clubs and live music venues in England will get a 20% cut in business rates from April. Andy Burnham says it could save venues about $1,400 in a year. Well, shares in Alphabet and Tesla are tumbling. The first of the so-called Magnificent Seven to report earnings this season failed to impress investors. Revenues are rising, but so is spending, driven by massive investment in artificial intelligence. Now investors are asking whether the AI boom is delivering returns. Fiona Cincotta is an analyst at City Index. Fiona, great to have you on the show again. So we have seen that both of these companies have seen revenues above expectations and both stocks fell. So what does this suggest?
Yeah, so, I mean, there's quite a lot going on here. I mean, if we look at Tesla, for example, share price down around 13%. We saw, a miss on profitability. We saw margins. So profit per car was also down considerably because they've been cutting prices, offering incentives. But as you mentioned, this idea of investment in sort of a pivot towards AI and robotics has been much bigger than expected, and that's what's really worrying investors. We saw something very similar with Alphabet. The share price has dropped around 6% despite really strong revenue, and adjusted earnings were above expectations, but the amount of capital expenditure which is going towards this AI infrastructure build out is enormous, and that's making investors very nervous.
Well, Fiona, we'll talk about Alphabet a bit later. So let's talk about Tesla first. So the company is expecting more than $25 billion in capital spending this year as it ramps up AI infrastructure and humanoid autonomy and also manufacturing. So do you think investors should be worried now?
I think, there is definitely a reason for caution. I mean, it's quite interesting because I think, Tesla has been talking about, robotics, autonomous driving for some time, but it does feel that investors are getting to this stage now actually where they're getting a bit impatient and they want to start to see significant returns on investments, and sooner rather than later. And I think it's this sort of time horizon that's getting investors a little bit nervous. That capital expenditure is up significantly from around $8 billion previously. So that's why we're seeing is investors want to see the return proportional to the investment, and that's not happening just yet.
And Fiona, do you think that could trigger probably broader sell-off in the AI industry, in the AI trade?
We have the potential. I mean, I think there's been a lot of jitters with regard to the AI trade heading into these earnings because of the very sharp run-up that we've seen in sort of AI stocks. So we are seeing investors becoming a little bit more picky, should I say, in where they're putting their money in the AI trade. Obviously, next week, we've also got sort of Meta, Microsoft, Amazon also reporting. So it's going to be very much in focus, but weak, or should I say strong spending numbers is going to potentially see further weakness in the share prices.
Well, thank you very much for your insight. That is Fiona Cincotta from City Index. Well, China has rejected U.S. claims that one of its leading AI startups copied American technology. A White House official says Moonshot AI used Anthropic's most advanced model to develop its new chatbot Kimi K3. The free AI model has rattled markets, with many saying it rivals the best U.S. competitors.
China has always opposed the politicization and weaponization of issues related to science, technology, and trade. Such actions will only disrupt the global development of AI and serve the interests of no party.
Well, this is Global Business Europe still ahead. Solar just became Europe's biggest source of electricity. So this marks a turning point.
Everything is a business story.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. The headlines again. Oil prices hover around $100 a barrel as Houthi attacks in the Red Sea threaten to create a second choke point on global supplies. And EasyJet's profits take a nosedive as soaring fuel costs and Middle East tensions hit travel demand. Well, Google has been fined $1 billion by the European Union for breaking rules designed to limit the power of big tech. The EU says Google gave an unfair advantage to its own services in search results, including shopping, hotels, travel and sports. It also found Google restricted how app developers could direct users to cheaper options outside its app store. Our correspondent Will Denslow is in Brussels. Will, great to see you. So this is not the first time Google has been fined. Is Brussels sending a wider message to the industry?
Well, this probe was launched back in 2024, and according to the European Commission, while Google has made more progress in complying with the Digital Markets Act, it says that this fine handed down to the tune of roughly $1 billion comes based on what they describe as the gravity of the alleged violation, as well as the duration of these infractions. Now, this fine and this violation, or perceived violation, is really broken down into a couple of different components. The first, so-called anti-steering. Essentially, the Commission alleges that Google didn't allow app developers to be able to provide customers through the Google Play Store other offers, other deals that might be available. Now, the other component is tied to the so-called preferential treatment. Essentially, if you're going onto a search engine, you're seeing Google-linked searches for things like apparel, things like flights, things like train bookings, not giving fair competition for other providers. Now, as you mentioned, this is part of a broader context. Just in recent days, we know that the Commission has provided a fine for AliExpress to the tune of around $600 million for its allegations of illegal and unsafe goods selling. China has described this as putting up digital barriers. We know that the Trump administration has long railed against European regulators. So the message is clear from the Commission. They say that anyone can do business here in Europe. They're not seeking to put up barriers, but the takeaway for the Commission is that anyone, wherever you may be located, have to play by the rules.
Oh, thank you, Will. That is our correspondent Will Denslow in Brussels. Global electricity use is accelerating. The International Energy Agency says demand will grow 3.6% this year and 3.8% in 2027, thus up from 3% in 2025. Industry, appliances, cooling, electric vehicles and the rapid expansion of AI data centers are all driving up the appetite for power. And it's happening despite electricity becoming more expensive to produce due to conflicts and trade tensions. Well, last month, a quarter of all electricity in the European Union came from solar power, the first time that ever happened. A report by the energy think tank Ember says the sun generated a record 52 terawatt hours in June, and that means solar outpaced nuclear, gas, wind, hydro and coal. And coal was responsible for just 8% of the block's electricity. Well, the record solar surge coincided with heat waves, meaning there was high demand for electricity. Solar helped to regulate networks, while other sources like wind and nuclear struggled. Well, two countries leading the charge were Spain and Germany, and both generated 1/3 of all their power from the sun last month. Even coal-hungry Poland was just short of a quarter, having rapidly expanded its solar power sector. So who is making all the panels? Well, China, that is 98%. The reason? Oh, that is the price. Making them in China costs around half of what it costs to make them in Europe. So for more, let's speak to Jan Rosenau, Professor of Energy and Climate Policy at the University of Oxford. Professor, great to see you. So just 5 years ago, remember, solar was just a supplementary power source, but in June, largely because of the heat wave, it was the largest power source. So can we genuinely or really call it a turning point?
I think so. And usually it starts with the first day when solar provides most of the electricity and is the biggest source. Then it is perhaps a week, then maybe a month. And in some countries, eventually it's a full year. That's usually how we reach these tipping points. And there's now lots of countries around the world where we see a similar pattern emerge. Whether you look at Pakistan or you look at Australia, it's not Europe where this is happening. This is happening around the world, and the main reason is that solar has gotten so much cheaper over the last 10, 15 years than ever before, and that is driving that significant uptake that we're seeing.
As you said, if solar power is becoming so abundant and so much cheaper over the past years, why does electricity still feel so expensive?
Well, the cost of energy on your electricity bill is only about half. There's other things on the bill like costs for the network, or we have to subsidize energy efficiency measures and lots of other policy programs that are often still on the electricity bill. And that means that even if we see lower electricity prices in the wholesale market, overall electricity bills are not going down as much yet. I think that is going to change now because the European Union has just published its electrification action plan, and alongside that they want to incentivize the use of more electricity, and they want to do this by lowering the taxes on electricity compared to fossil fuels.
And Professor, in renewable energy, a strong player is China, and much of the solar panel manufacturing capacity is also in China. Do you think Europe can achieve net zero without relying too heavily on China?
Well, clearly China will continue a very important role in the transition. I don't think it is realistic that Europe can create its own manufacturing capacity to make solar panels and battery cells. There are other technologies where Europe can produce a lot of the technologies domestically, but we have to recognize it's a global transition, and it's an interconnected world, and we have to rely on a whole bunch of other countries, not just China, to make this work. So I believe even in 20 years' time, China will still play a very important role when it comes to manufacturing some of the clean energy technologies.
Thank you very much for your insight. That is Professor Jan Rosenau from University of Oxford. Well, Hungary is launching its biggest wind power expansion in more than a decade. But as more renewable energy is added to the grid, keeping the electricity supply stable is becoming a bigger challenge. Our correspondent Pablo Gutierrez reports.
It looks like a row of shipping containers, but this is one of Hungary's largest battery energy storage systems, and is transforming the way the country gets power into its grid.
Hungarian energy production is very solar-based. During the daylight, when the sun is shining like it is right now, we have a huge surplus in energy production, so we can store those energy into the storage units and then discharge it back to the grid during the peak consumption hours.
The lithium-ion batteries were built by China's CATL. The system can respond to changes on the grid within milliseconds. About 90% of the electricity it stores comes from solar power. The Alteo facility delivers 49.9 megawatts of output and stores 99.8 megawatt hours of electricity. That's enough to power 50 homes all year round.
Each storage unit has a service life of about 15 years, and together this entire park can cut carbon dioxide emissions by 17,000 tons per year.
Experts say Hungary has become one of Europe's fastest growing solar energy markets. Now the focus is shifting to storage. Hungary's government has announced plans to increase its wind power generation tenfold by 2030. More renewable energy means more electricity that must be balanced across the grid.
Big advantage is that you produce your electricity between 9 o'clock till 5 o'clock in the evening. But you can see that after 5, life is not stopping, so electricity consumption will be there. If you have the photovoltaic generation, you can consume that energy not only till 5 o'clock, till you have the sunshine, but you can consume it till 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock when you watch your match football in the television. It can be still renewable energy based.
Solar power storage is only one part of Hungary's energy mix. The country still depends on imports and nuclear power to meet the demand. Alteo says battery storage helps connect those different sources into a more flexible system.
Roughly 25% is coming from solar. Of course, it's very dependent on the season because it's much higher during the sunny seasons.
For years, the challenge was producing more renewable energy. Now, the challenge is making it available when people need it. These battery units outside Győr are built for that moment. Pablo Gutierrez, CGTN, Győr, Hungary.
European car sales surged 13% in June with more than 1.3 million vehicles sold. Much of that growth came from electric vehicles, with demand jumping more than 52%. Rising fuel costs driven by the Middle East conflict are pushing more drivers towards EVs. Renault's first half sales edged down 0.4% as competition from Chinese car makers weighs on demand in its key European market. The French car maker sold more than 1 million vehicles in the first half of the year. And Ford and Geely are teaming up in Europe. The Chinese car maker will produce 2 electric SUVs at Ford's factory in Spain. They're also developing a new model together. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez visited the factory when the deal was first announced. Our headlines again. Oil prices hover around $100 a barrel as Houthi attacks in the Red Sea threaten to create a second choke point on global supplies. EasyJet profits take a nosedive as soaring fuel costs and Middle East tensions hit travel demand. And is big tech's big spending paying off? Tesla and Alphabet shares tumble as earnings fail to impress investors. Well, that's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching. More on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com. And do follow CGTN Europe on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok. And you can go to CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. Coming up next on CGTN Africa Live. See you again tomorrow, same time, same place. Now from all the team in London, that's goodbye.